Diving into part two here. By the way, editing on the fly in real time here. Uh, Diving into part two, concept creation. This project changed really quickly from the concept evolved, let's put it that way, pretty quickly based on mostly deadline. The original thought from the client was we've got a lot of people whose faces we want to show, and let's interview everybody. Let's interview
In a
everybody
lot of locations.
and a lot of locations. We want to show, we want to show these properties because they're a real estate development firm. So what if we go interview these people who were the people who showed up, and then cut a narrative together from that interview? And it really quickly, yeah, once we heard the deadline, which was, from what I remember, about two, maybe 3 weeks from a hard deadline. This wasn't like, we think we're going to email it out. This was, we have a live event, so like no pushing that deadline, right? So a clearly defined line in the sand for deadline, and we really started getting to work on thinking through what could make a great video, what could make a great story under that deadline. And it became pretty clear pretty fast that we couldn't interview that number of people and then get that cut into what we call a paper cut, and create a narrative out of that in the amount of time that we had before the meeting, right? And do you want to talk about how that, like, if some of those iterations, and that was that Friday when you and I were in the office, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think in the back of our mind, we were very aware of kind of the trends that marketing went in when it came to representation of COVID-19 in the workplace and individual lives and um, frontline workers. Those themes were very common. We saw them on our televisions. We saw them on social media, and we
Meaning what?
actually
Like a
even
lot
had.
of like self-shot content, like cell phone footage, like, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and also from a strategic standpoint, just how it's contextualized. So I think we were really familiar with also at this time how COVID-19 was being represented from a marketing standpoint, whether it's what we were watching on television or ads on social media. Um, and also, we actually had just attended a NAOP event where Kathy was on the panel discussing these marketing themes as well. So we're kind of familiar with where our clients stood on these things and stuff they've seen and what they use for examples. And we went back and looked at those examples. I think one of them was a Facebook ad, and then we found other ones as well. We found a really good Apple ad that we liked, and a lot of those ads really got to the human element of and the human representation and perspective of what it was like to be in COVID-19 and what it was like to be on the front line um, of of going to work every day if people had to leave their house and get these jobs done, and how despite all of that they kept going, and we couldn't have done it without them. Often too, we noticed that that type of content was reappropriated imagery from people taking it on their cell phones, um, or from social media, to the point where like you would see a framing of like Instagram or Facebook in the ad showing that it was taken from social media, first person perspective. That combined with our interest in wanting to kind of take a documentary approach to this really started to like get ideas going in our mind about how we wanted to tackle this for our client, and from what we were hearing from them, and how we could kind of weave everything together in a short period of time. So we came out with a couple of concepts that we introduced to Kathy very early on, within the first day that we were talking to her. Uh, Matt, do you remember what those concepts were?
Yeah, yeah. I remember you and I were in the office, and I remember driving into the office, driving into Charlestown, talking with Kathy, just kind of like continuing to chip away at this, which is a part of the process. I'll just say that I totally enjoy. It's fun to find. It's messy to find a concept, but it's often like a necessary messiness and a fun process. So we introduced two concepts. I think we felt from the beginning that there was no way we could go interview just from like logistics, right? I think we were pretty sure we couldn't effectively go interview 20 or 30 people and then have the time to cut that together into something on like a 2 or 3 week turnaround. So we were immediately thinking, okay, it's got to be different than that. We also didn't think we could, we wanted to focus on the human element, so we didn't want to make this about just about real estate. So we tended to like pull away a little bit from the idea of like, let's go film these buildings architecturally, but we knew that place was critical to the story. So the two concepts that we put forth were one was let's use all kind of like either existing social media content or self-shot cell phone footage. Let's see what people have captured of each other during this, and let's write a script to support that, or likely write a script to support that, and like let's tell this story that way. The other concept that we pitched was let's create video portraits. Let's create a documentary handheld style, but still well crafted message with a very tight script combined with hopefully very honest video portraits of these team members in their environment, and let's let their faces and their environment and the script tell this story of gratitude.
Taking a step back too, I would say the other concept didn't really work out because we got some really good communication from Kathy about her perspective into whether that would work or not, and she clearly thought that it probably wouldn't work to put that in the responsibility in the hands of their employees, especially from a creative standpoint. And it makes sense. Like that's what we do. So that's a reason why she's hiring us to come in with a professional camera and get these moments. But that feedback was important because I think in this process, we come into things kind of more with an objective mindset where we're trying to see things with a fresh perspective, fresh eyes, and kind of drop our preconceptions about what we think the story should be, or who these employees are, or what these places are like. Even though we do have a pretty good idea of that, it helps to kind of come in with more of an open mind and ask some very obvious questions in order to find out things that we don't know as well. So that was good feedback to hear that like it probably wouldn't work if we ask the employees to grab these moments with their cell phone and send them to us. They'd rather prefer have us go out there with a camera and do it.
I'll just add, along the lines of like concept creation and asking questions and things like that. One of the things that we sometimes warn clients about is like we might ask some questions that seem totally obvious or stupid, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of value to that because it's like you've got to as a creator of anything, you constantly have to like question your assumptions, right? And everybody comes to a problem with some level of bias. And by stating the question and having somebody else give you the answer, it can often like fill in gaps, or you might be wrong about what you assumed about something or how a story should be told or something like that. And I think I'll say when I was younger, I was less comfortable putting myself out there like that. There was a sense of like, oh, I've got to know the answers. It's like, nah, not really. You got to arrive
No,
at
it's
it.
okay to not know the answers at this point in the project. And I would push that even further and say like we kind of celebrate that as well. Like
Agreed.
This process is messy. It's never a straight line when you're trying to figure out a concept and connect all the dots in the beginning. So if you can kind of let down your guard, let down your ego, and ask certain questions that poke at things that you don't know, and kind of invite those blind spots to come into the space as inspiration and content to work with, then it makes sense that you kind of want to go in with that mindset. And we've found some pretty good success with that in the past. So it's become kind of part of our process.
Yep.
And language is limited too. I think like in this process, everyone kind of has their own way of describing something. Like we might both be looking at a swatch of teal color, and Matt might think it's blue and I might think it's green, and we're going to try as hard as we can to describe that, but we're still going to have different definitions of it, even though we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why we celebrate that messiness and like get into like these very kind of broad, very dumb, obvious questions sometimes that pinpoint exactly what we need to get at.
Yep. Okay, so in where we are in the process, client comes to us with a problem to solve. We, in a matter of like single-digit days, tried to collect a bunch of information, went through two different concepts, arrived at a concept on like a Friday, and needed to hit the ground running basically Monday with starting to film something uh, to achieve this. And we ended up landing on the concept of video portraits as the concept that we sort of hit the ground running with. So that brings us to part 3 of this, which is like talking about the filming aspect of this. There's one interesting piece where Kathy was filming some of it. You want to talk about that?